Hello, everyone. I'm Kennedy.
And I'm Vasilis.
We run Changemaker Z, a student-run initiative that aims to empower, educate, and connect GenZers interested in entrepreneurship.
We interview teenagers with impactful projects and create resources to help you change the world. If they can do it, so can you.
On this podcast, we discuss the logistics of creating different types of projects with GenZers who have already done it. We will leave our social media and website information in the description.
Hey everyone! In today's episode, we are here with Hamza Islam, the host of Oh My Curry Goodness podcast. This episode is all about identifying as Gen Z. Hamza, welcome to the show. So nice to meet you.
Thank you so much for having me. I've been following your podcast for a while, and so to be here is really cool.
Thank you so much for being with me today. So to begin with, what is your podcast all about, and how did you get started in general? If you have any significant guests, I know that you have many episodes. So, what's your favorite part of being a podcaster in the end?
Yeah, for sure. So I'll talk about my podcast. So my podcast is called Oh My Curry Goodness, and the reason I came up with that name is when we hear stories that are really interesting, we say "Oh my goodness," and curry is my favorite food. As someone who's South Asian, so we love to eat curry, and I want to include curry in the name. And so sometimes people like to add more emphasis on the goodness part. So like, oh my freaking goodness, or oh my insert word goodness. So I thought, oh my curry goodness would be a fun way to be amazed, but also to be inspired in some way. I started this podcast back in January, and I was always interested in learning about people's stories and getting to know the person behind the person. I find that a lot of podcasts interview people or talk to people because of the work that they're doing or highlighting their accomplishments. And I think that's really good. And it's something I know that a lot of people would love to have at some point in the future. But I really want to focus on the vulnerability, the authenticity, the human, like the human element, because what people don't get to understand much is those challenges and obstacles and the experiences that shape a person into who they are today. So I wanted to focus on that as much as possible. And like you said, I've brought a lot of Gen Z guests. I want to focus on Gen Z because I think our generation has started the conversation about being vulnerable, being authentic, but we haven't done too much of that. So I want to be that. I want to be the person that's going to let people share their stories in a unique way.
That is so true. Like, whenever we have a guest, we really represent, we present what they represent. We represent their project. Always we talk about, challenges, what is difficult, how we achieve it. But you're right. I don't think that a listener from another place of the world can really understand those challenges. And because maybe they never get into the idea to try the same thing. Or, I don't know, for instance, you're creating a company and you have to do some legal stuff. And where we're talking about, a non-profit organization, it has to follow those guidelines. And so in a podcast, we present this, but no one is going to get into that. So what do you propose so that we can experience as listeners of Gen Z podcasts those, mementos, like those difficulties that an entrepreneur, someone is experiencing when, doing some business, a project, anything.
Yeah, and those challenges and experiences need to be talked about because it's relatable to everybody. Not everyone can relate to the success being recognized by an organization, company, speaking at the United Nations or speaking at a TED conference. It's really important to talk about those challenges and obstacles because when the doors are closed and when no one really gets to, like, I won't be able to understand you, nor will you be able to understand me. You can understand as much as possible, but you'll never understand the full story. And so we will face, when what people don't see is we face more challenges than success. And so being able to talk about these things gives listeners hope in knowing that even though you have different challenges, regardless of what they look like, that you're able to have the tools or experiences that can shape you into becoming a better person today. And that's why I believe having these conversations is important. And especially with Gen Z, I think we care more about, unfortunately, we care more about the success stories as opposed to like the daily grind. And I think we need to talk about that because that's actually the success is 1% of the person's story. 99% of the story
100%.
is the actual grind and the things that you normally don't want to post about or talk about, but need to because that's actually part of the job, regardless of what field you're pursuing.
I agree with you 100%. Now I was thinking, since like we received the Spotify wrap for podcasters, artists, whoever uses Spotify, different sites about SEO. I was introduced to the fact that for the GenZers podcast, then 99% of listeners came thanks to one single episode that was recorded 2.5 years ago. And that's thanks to the guest that was too famous. It's the turning a creative passion into a successful career with Gox. Gox is a successful YouTuber and an artist from New Mexico. And so all of these people are coming from this episode. And then they, discover new things, new topics that they never thought before. But on the same time, I saw on the different analytics that people tend to visit this episode because it has an idea of being a video without being a video production. And probably with the new trend of podcasts being transformed to videos, I don't know, maybe podcasters will become YouTubers since it's going to be exactly the same things, but it's more brutal. It's not really hard edited. It's not with so many effects because usually a podcast is a conversation, is a story, or is commenting on things. What do you believe on that?
Like the idea of transitioning to the video.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I actually, for my podcast, I do video episodes as well. I think it's a really good idea because, for one, when people don't know who you are, they want to be able to know what you look like. So, because not everyone knows who Hamza Islam is. So, being able to have a video podcast allows you to understand, okay, what the person looks like. And then also, you've, like yourself, you've been able to interview a lot of incredible people, but at the same time, not everyone knows who that person is. So having that video episode kind of gives people an idea of what they look like, and then maybe they might want to follow their stuff more. However, I do also think that there is this misconception that because when you think of video, you think of YouTube. And so now your identity is more of like a YouTuber. People will think that you're now a YouTuber instead of a podcaster, but that's not entirely true. So it's one of those things where, because it's it's something we're seeing now. I think it's going to take some time before people understand that there's a difference between a YouTuber and a podcaster, but I still like the idea. However, I will say one drawback of the podcast, and maybe because I'm very, very, very critical on myself. I don't know if this is something you experience as well, but sometimes when you have video, you can see people's backgrounds, you can see people's faces, and sometimes you might have one thing that might ruin the entire experience. Whether you're talking and then as you're looking through the video, you might see that you have like a lettuce stuck in your tooth, and you didn't realize that until after the video, or after while you're editing the video. So now you're like, oh my gosh, there's like a piece of food on my tooth, and it looks embarrassing, but I think at the end of the day, I can understand people's versions of like whether they prefer audio or video, but I think having video gives you that sense of who the people are, and then I don't know. I think once you see them, you're more likely to be more interested in what they have to say. So I get some people think of podcasts as an audio version, but I also like the in person thing because it's literally real.
I see what you're talking about, and I agree with you. First of all, I found that it's really difficult if you want, to be so consistent and to have the best quality ever, to release a lot of content on podcast, and while it's also video production, because in the end all of this content needs to be edited in the end and be released, broadcasted, with whatever mean. On the same time, thanks to the fact that YouTube is the second largest, search engine, I think that's the reason why people tend to say, okay, you're doing a video, you're a YouTuber. But I agree to the point that a YouTuber and a podcaster is totally different things. A YouTuber is a personality. Is a personality that represents different things and presents videos and subjects with their own point of view. A podcaster can be this thing and many other things on the same time. If you're having, I don't know, a criminal podcast and you say stories or you read books, that's something really different from the idea of being a YouTuber in general. It's more like to the idea of having an audiobook listening, but it's a podcast. And here we're having a conversation. We talk about things. It's more like an interview, but it's not a real interview. It's a conversation in the end. People chatting, talk about things that they are interested into that. So I think that what identifies a podcast is the fact that there is this human factor that exists and coexists in every level and aspect of every production. While on YouTube, some YouTubers are really authentic, but there are also other many YouTubers that they are not so authentic and they are just following trends, promoting content. The same goes for podcasts about, advertising, things like that. But I don't think that's exactly the same thing. And thanks for mentioning that.
Yeah, one thing I'll add into that, I think you said it really perfectly, which is the fact that YouTubers, again, there are authentic YouTubers, they're able to share that vulnerability, but it's mostly they want to follow this some sort of trend. And I don't blame them because I can understand why people want to do this because it's not.
That's their profit.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
their profit. And maybe that's something really interesting. A YouTuber nowadays is considered to be a profession, like a job for many of people around the world. For podcasters, it's only for the 1% of the podcasters, because a podcast for some is something that's a hobby, doing in their free time. They want to have an impact on the world. The profit wasn't, their first goal when they started the podcast. If they want to expand it, of course, they're going to sign contracts, advertisements, etc. But also, this is something that differentiates YouTubers from podcasters.
Yeah, and I'll say like YouTubers, they focus more on that trend. And I think like YouTubers and podcasters can sometimes fall in the same category. Like there's a lot of similarities, but I think going back to what you're saying, and you said it's so true, which is that podcasters more so focuses on the conversation and like those real conversations. And I think we see more of that on podcasters as opposed to YouTubers. But like I said, you can see that happening frequently between podcasters and YouTubers. What I've noticed is that, yeah, if you want to differentiate between the two, you see a lot more conversation based stuff from podcasting and more content creating when it comes to like
Exactly.
YouTube. So
both is entertainment, but
for
they're
sure.
different kinds of entertainment. It's like when you go to YouTube to search for a TED video, but TED video is something more than entertainment. It's to learn about things. It's an open conference available in hundreds of languages, accessible to everyone. So maybe it's not the people or how they are creating content, but in the end, maybe they are the platforms that they differentiate people. Like podcasters were exclusively on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and now they tend to become part of YouTube because Google decided one day to close their program of Google Podcasts because they didn't have, the profits that they wanted to. And they said, okay, yeah, let's transfer everything to YouTube. And it's being a video that it's not a video, it's only audio, but it exists on the YouTube platform. I don't know.
Yeah. I will say though, I think because I think my podcast is on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. I think for our podcast, we want to reach as many people as possible.
Yeah.
And so I think it's a great sign. But I also think that, my worry with people, when people think like, oh, now you're a YouTuber, it's like, no, I'm
No,
still a
I'm
podcaster
a
because
podcaster.
my intention is to share stories, and I'm not looking for like any sort of, I don't want to say clickbait or anything. I'm not trying to be like, oh, let me say something that can get people going. It's people want to hear the conversations because, again, of those that storytelling or experience phase.
Yeah, totally agree with you.
Mhm.
When we're running a show for Gen Z, we tend to invite people of, that generation to reflect on their journey. However, sometimes guests that represent other generations have a lot more to share on the table for some particular subjects. So what do you think about that, according to your experience?
Yeah, I kind of go back and forth with this because my intention when I first started the podcast was to only speak to Gen Z. And that was mostly because, one, it was something I grew up, I had friends, but I didn't really get to hang out with them. Either that was because of timing or I just didn't fit in their friend group. So this is something like, I guess this is a way to, I guess, quote unquote, hang out with people. And I also want to go back to the idea of, well, I want to share people's stories and experiences. And we see that from other or older generations, but we don't see that from our generation. So that's something I wanted to take into account. As far as the idea of bringing multiple or older generations, I think it's a great idea. And I think, it's something that I've been looking into lately. I just don't know when exactly because I just want to focus on Gen Z at the moment. However, I think bringing in people from different generations whose purpose is to help other people is really important because for a lot of people, maybe they didn't get their success until later on in life, and they might be able to teach you things much better than maybe what you've been used to learning, whether that be fear of judgment, fear of, I don't know, fear of judgment, fear of rejection, failure. I think they might have more experience compared to our generation because they've known more about it because they've lived long enough or longer. However, one thing I will say though, and a friend of mine told me about this when I was talking about bringing in multiple generations, is make sure that if you are going to bring someone from different generations, make sure the language is appropriate. And what I mean by that is their way of life when they were 17 or 18 is much different from when we were 17 or 18. So if you bring someone who was born in 1950, they were 18 or 19 in like 1968, 1969. Their journey as a 19-year-old will be vastly different than as Gen Zers. So the conversations will be a bit different, but it's not anyone's fault. It's just, again, those experiences and perspectives. So I think bringing multiple generations is good because there's a lot more information that they can teach and pass down to generations like ours, generations after us, and so forth. But what I think will be really important is make sure that you do bring someone that can talk to a Gen Zer in a way that it's almost like explain it like I'm 5, that kind of thing. If you can't do that, then it's going to be difficult to actually connect with those older generations.
This podcast was created for Gen Z by Gen Zers, and we are very proud of that. But how do we identify as Gen Zers? What do you believe?
Yeah, this is when I saw this. I remember when you sent me the question sheet, and I had to really, really think about it because there's so many ways you can describe what makes Gen Z Gen Z. I think a couple of things that come to mind when it comes to how you describe Gen Z is, I feel like this is going to sound controversial, but I think one thing that comes to mind is their emphasis on impact as opposed to income. I think that's one of the things that comes to mind because a lot of the people that either we've interviewed or we've probably seen in the news, whether that be Malala, Greta Thunberg, I don't know. There's more people I can't think of off the top of my head, but they care a lot about giving back and inspiring people and making an impact because they see a problem and they want to address that issue. Now, unfortunately, there are people that will say, "Oh, what they're doing is bad," or really, there's so many other things to focus on right now. We don't need to focus on this. but they care about it because they see that there are so many other Greta Thunbergs, Malalas in the world that are not
that we don't see.
exactly, and they're not getting that success, and not in success not meaning recognition, but success in education or their struggle, their suffering in a
Or
different
resources in the end.
exactly. And so I think Gen Zers focus a lot on impact as opposed to income because they care about money, and I want to be clear because I feel like in the past I've underestimated the importance of income. You want to make sure that you have enough money to support yourself, but people want to focus on making people's day 1% better. And you see a lot of people, that's why you see a lot of people creating nonprofits, being part of organizations whose mission is to address a certain issue or tackle an issue, because even though they may be in a place where they're doing better, that there are people that don't have those same resources. And so to be able to make an impact in their day is really important. One other thing I would say is I know this is usually a bad word, but I think it's a good word in a sense, which is misunderstood. I think the reason, and it goes back to the fact that a lot of people that I've met on my podcast will be open about how even because of their age, they're usually talked down upon. So they'll have this idea, but then they might go, "Oh, but you're too young," or "Okay, yeah, that's nice. We'll keep you posted." But they want to invoke change right now, and so there's this confusion. Like, okay, why are they talking about this? Because they haven't experienced it yet, or they don't really understand the person's motivations as to why they do it. But the only person that knows that person's why is themselves. Like, I have a why and why I do my podcast because I'm interested in learning about people's stories. You have a why because you're interested in learning about people's experiences as well. And so I think misunderstood is another thing, just because people don't understand people's motivations and their interest as to why they're being a part of the impact, as opposed to just being quiet. So that's where I kind of see it.
We are on the same page on that. I believe that authenticity is crucial. And for Gen Z, I think that's not a trend, it's the reality. We are so tired from what we have seen to be happening on the planet, for instance, or thanks to the internet, we have access to so many information that we can make our own choices and create our own opinions for, I don't know, a country, a decision, whatever, in an international scale. And so this makes our decisions and the way that we react much more powerful than it was for our parents, our grandparents 20, 30 years ago. And this is why when you said, I met a guest that it had an idea, but they said, but you're too young. For my guest, it was exactly the opposite. They were told this, and in the end they said, okay, and so what? I'm going to apply the idea. Why? Because, first of all, they had the resources to do it, so they wanted to try this out, and that's crucial as well. If you don't have the resources, you can't try anything. If you don't have the education, you are not complete as a person. So you're not free. We could use this word of other people trying to put you on the same bucket and try to say, oh, that's correct, that's not correct, because you don't have the criticism to say that's true or not. And I think that this is what characterizes Gen Z. It's exactly what you said.
Yeah, and I think there's so many ways you can think about Gen Z, but I just think those two, based on what I've learned from people that I've got to interact with, is that people don't understand a person's why. But I think we need to have those discussions as to, like, okay, why do you feel the same way? And even though we may have differences, can we find a compromise so that we're able to help those people that you are trying to advocate for? And I think if we focus more on making impact as opposed to income, I think we will see a much better world, because I think income is great, but I think if you focus too much on income, then that becomes your primary target and you do everything possible, which then falls into the idea or area of ethics. Like, okay, is this appropriate or this is not appropriate. But impact is a bit different because it's like, people literally know your intentions. They can see that you're trying to do something good, as opposed to, questioning. I don't know. I kind of see it differently, but yeah, that's
Yeah.
what yeah.
We need to become the echo chambers of what we believe that's true. And then we will leave other people to try this out and then decide if it's what we believe or not.
Yeah, for sure.
So it's about the journey, not the destination. That's the slogan of your show. So which is your favorite journey?
It's weird because I've interacted. I think I've done 40. I've done 48 interviews, 47 with guests. I did one interview about myself because people didn't know that, or people didn't know much. In terms of my favorite guest journey, I honestly don't know. I think every guest you bring on to the podcast, or every guest you have a chance to talk to, will give you something different. And I don't believe that there is one person or a group of people that I think of where it's like, wow, I can't believe, well, that was interesting. I feel like everyone has something brings something different to the table. But if I were to answer your question, this may not be the best answer, but I'll just say it anyway. I think my favorite journey has just been this journey I've taken as a podcaster. The reason why I say that is I have had 3 podcasts in the past, but I started one, quit, started one, quit, started one, quit, because it just didn't sound right. So I think my favorite journey has been this past year and being able to survive for 1 year of podcasting, being able to learn about what makes a great podcaster. And so whether that's understanding how to do research on the people that you've interviewed, what are the things they've talked about, what are the things they haven't talked about, getting a microphone. I didn't have that at first, and I didn't realize I needed one until I was listening to one of my episodes, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I sound terrible. Having a camera was important as well. Having a good background, having a great presentability. That was something I had to learn along the way. And yeah, there were some growing pains, but I really enjoyed that journey. And now as I get ready for season 2 of the podcast, I know that these are the things I need to do. And I'm sure that there are more things I'm going to be willing to learn. So I don't think I have a favorite guest journey, but I will say my favorite, like me personally, I've enjoyed my personal journey of the podcast and being able to do it 1 year instead of quitting after 3 or 4 months.
I think that this is the most authentic answer, and relates exactly to what we discussed beforehand. And a small notice, I do have a microphone, but I forgot to connect it because, guys, that you're listening right now, I was late for my interview today with Hamza, and I feel so sorry about this. And in the end, I forgot to connect my microphone, so you will have to withstand with me not being in so good quality, but having an amazing quality concern, whatever it has to do with this conversation today.
Yeah, it's okay. I've had interviews before where I forgot to connect my microphone, and it's a terrible feeling, but now I remember. But although I think it's a human moment, because I think while we acknowledge it, it's bound to happen, and I think it's more of a human thing, and I don't
It's
blame
more
you
human
for it,
thing.
because yeah, I've been late to my interviews too, so you're totally fine.
It's like when you create your first episode ever, and when you listen to your voice for the very first time, it doesn't listen how you listen this to your ears, to your own ears. It's it's completely different. And sometimes you say, "Oh my God, this is my voice. I can't continue listening to that. It's horrible." And then second episode, third episode, 48 episode, it becomes better and better.
It's kind of like exposure therapy in a way, where because you're exposed to it so much, it no longer becomes a thing.
Yes.
But yeah, I've listened to because I usually edit my podcast as well, and I hate the sound of my voice. But I will say, I interviewed someone who had a British accent, and I was like, I told him during the interview, I said, I wish I had your voice. You sound very professional. And he's like, oh, I hate the sound of my voice. And I'm like, wow.
I think
funny
that
how
that's
we
the same
all-
for everyone. Everyone hates the sound of his own voice.
Yeah, like
And
we
of
hate our
course,
own
yeah.
voice. We hate our own voice, but other people like our voice. So it's a weird disconnect.
Yeah. Among all the guests that you have ever filtered on your show, what's the thing that they all have in common? What do you believe? Like, for instance, our guests have been inspired from the potential of entrepreneurship while following their dreams, whatever it takes.
Yeah, this is a really interesting question. I think there's two things that come to mind what I've in terms of what I've learned, which is either embracing fear or challenges or patience.
Mm.
These two things come to mind, and I think these are very important skills to adapt. And those are the type of skills you don't see equipped in our actual toolkit. This is more of like a mental thing. But I'll start with patience. I think patience is very important because all of us would love for our passion projects to go well, whether that's our podcast, nonprofit, organization, company, athletic career. We all want to be successful. We want to achieve our dreams. But success takes a long, long, long time to get there. It's not an overnight thing. And I used to think that it's an overnight thing. Like, okay, we need to get this done next week, next month, 2 months from now. But then a lot of the people that I've interviewed will say, oh, no, 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 no. It might take years before you get to the top. So I think understanding patience is really important. And even though you're going through a difficult journey, that knowing that it's going to take some time, you have to do the work in obviously between the first day and then hopefully that when your dream comes true. But you have to be putting in the work, but you have to be patient and knowing that it's gonna be a journey. So the earlier you adapt that and you understand that you're gonna have more losses than wins is really good for your mindset. The second thing is embracing those challenges and fear. I think what holds us back from being able to do something special is that fear of judgment, fear of what people are going to say, rejection, and all these other challenges. And I think, and it's so, I keep saying I think, but it's true. It's these things happen, but what I've been able to do lately, and I used to not do this when I first started podcasting. Now I feel as if I'm doing a better job is embracing those challenges, embracing that fear, embracing that rejection. I try to reach out to as many people to join my podcast as I try to do that as much as possible. Sometimes people say yes, sometimes people say no, sometimes I don't even get an answer. When it comes to supporting my podcast, I mean by like friends, sometimes I'll go or sometimes I'll ask them to share their podcast on their social media page. And I'll be honest with you, I've been left on red. Some people have told me no. Some people have unfollowed me. Some people blocked me. Right. So obviously people's challenges are different, but as coming from a podcaster, sometimes we like to stay stationary or complacent because we're so scared to get out of our comfort zone. But all these people that I've had on the podcast, patience is important, of course, but definitely embracing getting out of your comfort zone, embracing the those answers that you're not expected because it helps you develop thick skin. And as you continue to get to the top, one of the things I've also noticed is, and I'm sure you probably noticed this as well, is that when you bring people on, they haven't reached their end goal. I mean, well, okay, take it back. They've reached their goal, but they're still continuing to get to the next level, the next level, next level. There's no finish line. And so our challenges vary, but getting out of their comfort zone is really, really important because the higher you go, the more expectations there are, and obviously more people that will say no to you. But developing that strong armor is going to be important. So patience and embracing those challenges. Those are some of the things I've learned based on my conversations with people from on the podcast.
I believe that the key word here is failure. We shouldn't be afraid of failing. I'm saying that because lately I was in a very, bad psychological situation because I was failing a lot in many, many things. Because it was so unusual to me because, okay, you fail one time, second time, third time, but not being so close one another. And this can be so difficult for someone to manage these things. And this is when we say, okay, mental health is so important for people, and no. There are plenty of conversations about that. But in the end, even if I am afraid of failure, I accept the existence of failure. I'm not saying this only for the listeners, for you, for the conversation. I am also saying this to me, to listen this for me, for myself. The second thing that I want to say is that those advices, I think that they are the gold canon of advices, because he talked about life-changing experiences, and this is what determines what type of people we're going to become, later in our lives, or how this can impact our everyday lives, and how in the end this can impact the society, or our work, our mission. And I think that that's all what matters.
If there's one thing I would like to add, the failure part is something that we embrace or we understand, but we hate to experience it. But one of the things I usually do, and I know this sounds complacent, but I think it's a sense of feeling less alone. When you fail, you think it's the worst thing in the world, and whatever that is, failed exam, failed project, failed whatever, yeah, that happens. But I think the best feeling, or the thing that gives me hope, is seeing other people's experiences with failure. And so, if if let's say you had a bad exam or bad school
A bad day.
bad day, bad school semester, and you see someone else who experienced the same thing, but they're able to do incredible things. In your mind, you have this hope that, okay, I'm not the only one who experienced this. So it gives you this hope. Now, I don't want to make it sound like, okay, they've experienced it, but they're doing good things. I'm fine. Like, you still have to be able to put in the work, and you're gonna have to put in more work than you're used to. But at the same time, just know that there are other people who've experienced the same thing. So it should give you the sense of hope, motivation, inspiration that you're able to do something good. It may not be exactly what that person is doing, but whatever you're passionate about, you can draw back from those experiences and go, they experienced something that I've experienced, but they're able to do their special thing. So it gives me hope and motivation that I can do things. It's not like just because your life will not be defined by a bad semester, but will be defined by how you respond to those certain failures.
Mm-hmm. So in the end, how can we set goals and successfully achieve them?
Yeah, this is something I struggle with, to be honest. I think the most important thing is to set reasonable goals instead of extreme goals. And what I mean by extreme goals is, as podcasters, we would hypothetically love to get as many people listening to as many people listening to our podcast. We want to be the number one top 10 podcasters on Spotify. We get all the stuff. But those aren't really reasonable goals, especially when you're starting out. It's kind of the same thing with, if you want to do 100 push-ups in one setting, if you've never done a push-up before, you're not going to do 100 push-ups in one setting. So the most important thing is set small goals, because those are much more manageable and are more in your control than those extreme goals. And it's great to have them, don't get me wrong, but if you want to, sometimes we question ourselves early on, and you don't want to destroy your mental health, or you destroy your mindset to the point where you're going to give up on something that a lot of people actually believe in. So setting yourself small goals, thinking about what are some things that is a much better goal to reach. So for example, if your goal is to get 5 plays an episode, that's a much more reasonable goal than my goal is to get 100,000 people listening, because there's no way, especially when no one knows who you are. So look for those small, tangible, those small goals that you can reach, and then try to build off of that. That's one goal. And then the second thing, and this is more this is more for podcasters or organizations, is going back to the why you're doing the thing. I use this analogy, but envision like your favorite cake. What makes a great cake is the cake itself, not the icing, not the cherry on top or anything else. It's the cake themselves, and people are going to remember your cake based on how the cake tastes. So when it comes to podcasting, your company, your organization, people want to know the content behind, or the mission behind your organization. as podcasters, our mission is to share people's stories. As an organization or a nonprofit, your mission is to spread awareness about an issue. Don't focus on partnering with the best or being with the best. People don't want that. People care more about the content.
Yeah.
The cherry on the top or the icing is like 1%, but people want to know how the cake actually tastes. Or for non-food analogies, like people want to care about what your main mission of your nonprofit is, or what your main mission of the podcast is. People want to connect to the content as opposed to the things that like, I guess, like the things that you don't need but would like to have, like that icing on top. So that's kind of where I see in terms of like how you should set goals.
I love this point of view. I think that we should always look back from where we got started, so that we remind ourselves whenever we struggle or anything, that look, like 2, 3, 10 years ago, it was much harder. Now you arrived to achieve this and this and this. And on the same time, a wise man once said, it only takes one person to listen to make the difference. And I think that this is all that matters. Like one single person that will listen, but really listen to what we said today. It's going to make the difference. It's going to talk about this with friends, or maybe to reflect on the things that we said today and decide if he agrees or not. And maybe he will make a new decision in his life or her life, and make a life-changing moment for him or her. And this is what it all matters, I believe.
Yeah, and I'll be openly honest about my podcast. I don't have 100,000 views. I am nowhere near that. I'm still trying to grow that. But I think one of the best feelings in the world is when you see people send you messages on Instagram or email and saying, hey, I've listened to your episodes and I really love the conversations you're having. And so it goes back to the idea of like, okay, you don't have to worry about getting a lot of people listening. The fact that you're making an impact on one person's life and that they saw value in the conversation, doesn't matter how many episodes they listen to, but the fact they found value in it is enough to give you that sense of like, okay, I am doing something right. But I think we need to be able to focus on that content stuff, because a lot of people judge people based on the statistics that people have or the credibility. And it's like, look, they're not the most famous podcaster, but don't underestimate the message they're trying to send. Mm-hmm. So that's where I believe.
Mm-hmm. So I think that this episode is coming to its end. It was such a great opportunity to talk with Hamza about identifying GenZers in today's society. I would like to thank Hamza for being with us today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was a great conversation, and I love everything that you've been doing. So I've also listened to your podcast to think about how to become a better interviewer. Usually I take notes on each guest, and I also will take notes from like the interviewer themselves, like how they answer or respond to certain things. So it's anytime I listen to fellow podcasters, you guys helped me become a better interviewer. So I appreciate everything that you've done and for letting me be a part of your community.
That's so amazing. So thank you so much. I'm becoming emotional right now, but I never thought that I could really be an impact, or we could be an impact too. I know that it's creating a podcast because we don't believe that we are best to do something, and listening that from another person is something that really makes us feel so grateful, like that we achieved our goal to make an impact. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course.
So guys, before we'll leave you for today, I wanted to make sure that everybody has installed the GenZers to Rise application, both available on App Store and Play Store. You can find our episodes as well as valuable podcasts to listen to, articles from our friends at thread.com, and an amazing quotes library for you to discover every single day. And I think that's the end. So until next time, do not forget to change the world. Bye!
guys for listening. We hope you enjoyed our conversation. We had such a great time. Make sure to leave us a review. If you want more Changemakers content, you can follow us on Instagram at GenZers to Rise and on Facebook at ChangemakersZ.